Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Meet the Paralympian. This is our series that we've been running for the past couple of weeks, and we are here today with the brilliant Gemma Collis-McCann. Gemma, having first taken up wheelchair racing whilst at Durham University, competed both at the London 2012 and Rio 2016 Paralympic Games, and despite being entirely self-funded in 2017, she became the first female ever to win a World Cup event alongside her athletic career. She works as a sports journalist for the BBC, and it's a real pleasure to have Gemma with us today. So, hello, Gemma.
Hi.
And I'm joined with Zain, our sports officer, Inshal, our community activities officer, and John, who was part of the fencing team at the University of Bradford. And I'm just going to, there he is, I'm going to unpin him for now, but he'll be back later when he'll be asking some great technical questions that we will never get our heads around. So, what I start off with all these questions, Gemma, and I ask all the people we have in is, how did it feel to represent Team GB?
I mean, absolutely incredible. For me, it kind of came very quick, quite suddenly almost, because I've not always been a wheelchair fencer. And for a long while after I got my disability, I didn't think I'd ever be able to do sport again. And essentially, I started at Durham University, and at that point, I was playing wheelchair basketball. And I was hoping, that one day I'd be in the Great Britain team in that. I was representing Wales at the time, and I was kind of making progress, but not at that point yet. And I was just training by myself one day, and this really kind of quite elderly gentleman walked up to me and in a really strong Hungarian accent said, "Hi, my name's Laszlo. I'm the GB head coach for wheelchair fencing. Have you ever tried it, and would you like to?" And I very nearly said no. I mean, for starters, I thought that he was just some creepy old bloke. But he gave me what looked like a reputable business card. And, I thought about it, and I very nearly said no, because the only thing I knew about wheelchair fencing at that point was that the chairs are fixed in place in a frame. And I thought, you know what, I love crashing into people at top speed in my basketball chair, knocking them out, getting knocked out myself. And I thought, it's going to be so boring. It's going to be like chess, it's going to be really static and slow. But despite those kind of hesitations, I thought, you know what, I've just started at uni, I'll give it a go. And I went the next week, absolutely loved it. I mean, for starters, I couldn't have been more wrong about the sport. It's incredibly quick, even quicker in a wheelchair than it is able-bodied, because you can't run away. And yeah, I just loved it. And ironically, the thing I loved most was the fact that it is like chess, because you're having to outwit your opponent whilst also being really, physically powerful, fast and aggressive. But yeah, I kind of went from there, and within 3 months, I'd been selected for the GB team because I'd shown some good results at nationals. And 10 months after first picking up a sword, I represented Great Britain at the London Paralympics. So it was a really quick journey from kind of start to that point. So I think for me, it was just really surreal the first time I pulled on my jacket and it said Great Britain on the back. It was kind of the realization of really kind of a lifelong dream for me. It had always been my goal as a young kid to go to the Olympics. It was this magical thing to me. And, even though I was absolutely petrified of needles at age 8 when I first saw the Olympics, I said to my dad, if I ever get to represent Great Britain, I'll get a tattoo to commemorate the achievement. So, yeah, it was just a realization of a lifelong dream, really. And
Did you get the tattoo?
Yeah. Do you know what? Everyone asks this question, okay? It's always a regret that I even mentioned it. I haven't got the tattoo yet. I know we're now many years on, 8 years on. But no, I haven't got the tattoo yet. Mainly because I know exactly what I want, but I can't decide where to get it. Also, I mean, with the condition that I have, there is a slight risk that I could almost get a relapse of the condition in wherever I have kind of an injury or a tattoo. So a lot of people are kind of telling me it's a bad idea. But I am going to get it eventually, maybe just when I've retired.
Sounds good.
Hi, Gemma. So I've got a question for you, and it's going to be like, so in times like these, when people are sort of locked inside their houses, like in cages, to be honest. So have you done anything differently to keep yourself busy during this lockdown period, or do you still train in lockdown if you start, if it's tier 2, do you go to gym? So what's your day-to-day schedule in the whole lockdown period and beyond?
For the first kind of six and a half months, I couldn't fence at all. So I didn't pick up a sword for 6.5 months, you know, from the start of kind of March, really, because that's when our first competition got cancelled. And then obviously went into lockdown. And for that period, I was in Manchester, which is where I own a house with my husband, but not where I train usually. Usually I train down south in Buckinghamshire and London. So for me, it was quite different because I was completely away from fencing. And I did find to start with that actually the days felt quite long because I was still doing my fitness training and doing, you know, weights work and things like that. Like anything I could do by myself at home. And I'm lucky that my granddad has made me, along with my dad, has made me this kind of like arm and body that replicates an opponent. I mean, I was kind of hitting that, but it can become quite monotonous. And I think like everybody, you know, you kind of struggle a little bit with the lack of variety. But, you know, I think for me, the thing that probably helped me most in lockdown was just getting back involved in some coaching with a club that I'm involved in. And I was giving Zoom classes, basically to young kids, teaching them fencing over Zoom. And I think that was a lifesaver for me, really, because it just gave me that other kind of thing to focus on because I couldn't do as much training as I usually would. And for a little while, my work dried up as well. So I think that really helped. And then kind of more recently, kind of after that initial 6.5 months, I've been able to return to training properly. Fortunately was designated kind of an elite athlete in terms of the restrictions. So even during the most recent national lockdown, I've been able to train kind of as I usually would. So kind of the second half of, I guess, of this year has been a lot easier because I've been able to get really back into my training. But I think I've been really strangely motivated throughout the whole period in terms of my training. I've been hitting it probably harder than I have done really since I kind of, I guess, moved away from being a full-time athlete and went into the kind of like the working world alongside fencing. So yeah, it's been really good. I think I'm a lot fitter and stronger, and hopefully I'll give a few people a shock when we come back to the next competition.
I think that's the spirit. Gemma, in your answer, you mentioned your transition from being a full-time athlete to someone who's also working professionally and alongside doing your training for fencing as well and competing in challenges. So how did that felt when you had to, I mean, sort of sacrifice your 24 hours training schedule to fit in your professional life as well? So can you tell us something about your transition? I mean, what was your thought process? How did you sort of manage to balance both?
It was out of necessity more than anything. You know, we unfortunately as a sport haven't been kind of fully funded since 2013. So, you know, I've been self-funded for a really long time now. And for the first few years of that, up until Rio, I was kind of studying at university. I was at Durham. And, you know, it was quite easy to keep up being a professional athlete alongside studying because you obviously got student loans and grants and things like that you can access. But it kind of came to a point, I guess, where really if I wanted to keep on fencing, I needed to start bringing in some money because the amount that I spend on fencing is really quite significant because of having to self-fund. So I kind of started thinking about what I would like to do. And I was really fortunate in 2014 to have been selected to go to the Sochi Winter Paralympics as an ambassador for Buckinghamshire as the birthplace of the Games, because that's where I'm originally from. And it was kind of while I was there and I was at a Paralympic Games, but outside of the athlete bubble. So instead of actually being in it, I was kind of on the periphery and seeing the stories develop and things like that. And that's when I started to think to myself, actually, you know, maybe I don't want to be a lawyer anymore. I think it'd be quite difficult to juggle with fencing anyway. And I started thinking about sports journalism. And kind of as a result of that, I applied for like a 9-week work experience scheme with the BBC, loved it. And then was very fortunate to get a year's journalism trainee scheme contract kind of off the back of Rio. So I literally came back and the day after Rio went into full-time work with the BBC. So, I mean, I didn't, it wasn't a transition as such, as more of a real shock to the system. But yeah, I mean, it's very different. I can't train anything like as much as pretty much any of my competitors. Almost all of my competitors are full-time athletes and fully funded. So it's difficult, but, you know, I'm spending, you know, a qualification campaign, which is maybe 18 months to 2 years, is costing at least £40,000. So competition costs and things like that. So I didn't have a choice not to get into the world of work, really. But, you know, I think it gives me something else to focus on. You know, if results aren't going away, it can be very easy to get quite fixated on things. Whereas having that other outlet and having a job that I absolutely love because I love sport is, I think, is it in a way very useful.
Thanks, Gemma. I don't know if you heard, just a bit ago, a couple of my friends were here and they saw you and they were like, "Oh my God, it's Gemma Collis." No, they didn't confuse you for Gemma Collins. They actually knew who you were. So how does it feel, you know, since you represent Team GB, how does it feel? How have you seen a difference in how the way people treat you since you become famous?
Not really. I mean, I would never class myself as being remotely famous, to be honest. But I think, you know, like when I'm getting the train up and down from kind of like Manchester, Buckinghamshire, kind of pre-COVID, obviously quite often in GB tracksuit, just because that's what I'm going straight to training. And, you know, just people are very supportive. They usually have questions. They usually want to find out what sport you do, you know, what you've achieved. And it's just nice to know that, you know, that kind of spirit that we had from the London Games is still there in terms of people having that interest and seeing somebody in a GB tracksuit and maybe not knowing who that person in particular is, but still supporting us and wanting to know how you're getting on and wishing you luck for the next games and things, which is really lovely. So yeah, it's nice. I mean, London was insane. Like you literally, the minute you came out of kind of the athletes areas, you would absolutely get mobbed by people wanting autographs and things like that. And I mean, that was very, very weird and surreal experience, but it was an amazing feeling I mean, you could literally feel the ground shake even when people were shouting. I had all my family there and I could hear my nan being like, "Go on, Gemma." So yeah, you know, it's great to have people's support.
Definitely. And hopefully we'll be there cheering you on for the next one. It's Tokyo, isn't it? Next year.
Excellent. Abdul, you have joined the chat. Thank you for joining us. Abdul is our education officer.
Hi, Gemma. Nice to meet you. Joined a bit late, just computer problems. So I actually have multiple questions for you. I just want to ask, what diet do you have?
What diet do I have? Good question. I mean, I try to have a very high protein diet, mainly for kind of like muscle recovery and things like that. At the moment, I'm kind of in a bit of a dieting stage where I'm trying to lean out a little bit in preparation for Tokyo. So, you know, high protein, really focusing on that for the recovery. And I mean, my diet's a little bit odd and very monotonous because I have, unfortunately, back in 2013, my stomach stopped working properly. So I actually was in hospital for a couple of months and ended up having to have a feeding tube inserted. So for, you know, the last, how many years? The last 7 years I've been competing with a feeding tube and kind of taking a lot of my nutrition through that. And it's only this year that I've been able to have that out. So, but I'm not kind of, it still doesn't work fully. So I pretty much eat the same meals all the time. I have a lot of mince, I have a lot of fish, a lot of things with a lot of sauce. Like it's pretty boring, but it's better than, I guess I'm eating properly. So that's more enjoyable. But yeah. And I mean, in terms of like supplementation and things like that, for fencing, caffeine is quite a big one in terms of your alertness levels. So I supplement with caffeine quite a lot, particularly competition days. I'll be like absolutely buzzing.
That's lovely, thank you. Can I ask another one? So can you explain what happens on competition day?
So on competition day, essentially, I mean, it's probably best to start the day before competition. So we get there and the day before you have to go through weapons control. So you basically have to submit all of your weapons, all of your clothing, everything to basically get checked for safety. So they'll make sure that everything meets a certain standard and, you know, even to the smallest detail, whether your weapon's not kind of too stiff or whether there's like one of the grates on your mask is moved ever so slightly. They're really, really stringent on it.
Wow.
And so everything goes through that. That can take hours. And I mean, like you can be sat in a queue for hours waiting for this because there's maybe like 200 athletes at the competition all having to do the same thing.
Yeah.
So you kind of do that the day before competition. You hopefully get all your kit back. It hopefully is all passed. If not, you go get back in that queue. And then from there, I usually have like a practice lesson with my coach if I've been fortunate enough to be able to take my coach to that competition. Because I self-fund, it varies basically depending on whether it's long haul or not. And then the next day, kind of on competition day, it's usually pretty early start, quite often getting up at maybe 5 a.m. And then you get to the venue. I always try and get there really early. I know that I'm a little bit of a, I take my time, everything. I'm quite particular.
Can't be overprepared.
Exactly. But yeah, I like things to be done a certain way. So I usually get myself to the venue at least 2 hours before the competition starts.
Okay.
If we've got a later start, luckily sometimes the women are given a slightly later start than the men. If we are, then I get there a little bit later, but I get there in time to kind of at least support my teammates for maybe an hour before I kind of get my head in my own zone. And then basically you have a pool round where you fence, maybe you're in a pool of 6 or 7 people, you fence all of them to 5. And then after that stage, you're ranked against everyone else that's been in the pools. Yeah. And then basically your fight kind of off. So say you're in the last 64, and it's a complete 64. You'll have the first ranked person fencing the 64th, and then second, I guess, 63rd, so on and so forth. Yeah. And then basically it's just a knockout from there. And instead of being over 5 hits like it was in that first pool round, it's over 15. And then, basically your day can be very short if you don't do very well, or it can be a really, really long one.
Be super long, I can tell. Oh wow. So like you're like fighting at least 30 times on the day.
You're fighting, I mean, if you do terribly, then you're probably only fighting maybe 7 times.
Oh, but, depends on how you do,
Yeah, you can be fighting a lot more than that. I mean,
wow.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was great.
Cool. Thank you very much, everyone. Gemma, you weren't born as a wheelchair user, am I right in saying? What events happened that led you to being in a wheelchair?
So I mean, when I was younger, I was, I didn't have a disability at all. I was competing at a very high level in, first of all, figure skating when I was very young, and then I moved into hockey and athletics. And it was athletics that I was really passionate about, triple jump in particular. And I was competing for my school in triple jump one day, and I got a really sharp pain in my ankle. And I remember thinking, oh, that's not good. But this competition was one where basically the further I jumped, I could get more points for my school. So even though I was winning the competition, I was determined to keep going to see if I could push that distance a bit further. So I took my next jump and the next one, and it was kind of getting progressively more painful, but I still went and did the relay. But after that relay, I could barely walk. I was limping really severely. My PE teacher pretty much had to carry me to the bus. And I was worried because I knew I had a big competition coming up. So I went to the doctors the next day, and the doctor at the time said, don't worry about it. You just sprained it. Give it a couple of weeks. You'll be absolutely fine. Just rest it. So I was quite relieved. I thought, well, thank goodness for that. It could have been a lot worse. But kind of 2-3 weeks, excuse me, 2-3 weeks came and went, and things were no better. And then we're kind of getting to a month, 2 months, 3 months. Things weren't getting better. In fact, things were actually getting worse. And the pain was getting more and more severe. And, I went to doctor after doctor, and nobody could tell me why I was in so much pain. I had kind of loads of different treatments for people guessing what they thought was wrong, but they were really struggling to actually pinpoint what was. And eventually they found that I had an extra muscle in my ankle that was trapping some of my tendons. So they said, right, we'll take that out. You'll be absolutely fine. But after that operation, I woke up and the pain was, it was the most intense thing you can imagine. Like I couldn't have a sheet on my leg, like nothing could touch my leg. It was absolutely excruciating. And it stayed that way. I was on loads of morphine and loads of painkillers, and I was still in absolutely excruciating pain, like struggling to, I was sleeping downstairs on the sofa because I couldn't get upstairs. And that kind of went on and on until eventually, about 18 months after that initial injury, somebody was able to tell me what had happened. And they sat me down and said, you've got a condition called complex regional pain syndrome. And probably a lot like you guys, I was kind of sat there thinking, well, what on earth is that? And he went on to explain that it basically means that the nerves had malfunctioned. So basically, instead of kind of doing all the normal things that they should, they weren't controlling temperature properly. So that leg was about 3 degrees colder than my left and a bit blue to look at. They weren't doing normal touch. So like I say, you could touch it with a feather and I would be crying my eyes out. It was excruciating. Yeah. And and they don't know why it happens. You know, you could stub your toe tomorrow and get this condition. They don't know why it happens, and they don't really have any idea of how to stop it or cure it either. You know, he said to me, you know, there are some things we can try. You're young, you know, you have a better chance than other people might. So let's try all these different things. And I had treatment after treatment, and they really varied in kind of from the weird to the wonderful. I mean, one of them, they basically replaced they put a tourniquet around my leg and basically kind of stopped the blood flow to my leg, and instead replaced it with anaesthetic, then manipulated my ankle. And I had to have 3 courses of that over a period of 3 weeks. And then when they let the tourniquet go and you feel the blood rush back in, you have no idea how warm your blood is until it's rushing back into your leg. Like, it was agony, like so burning pain. And I just had treatment after treatment, and it wasn't getting any better. And I remember the very last treatment I had, and basically they'd said to me, what we're going to do is we're going to do a small operation and basically burn through one of the nerves in your back. And the idea being that if we kind of cut that off, then hopefully the pain signals will stop. And, you know, the doctor was really, really hopeful. And I found this was kind of quite a cycle. You know, they'd be really, really hopeful, and they'd say, you know, I'm sure you're going to be walking out of here, or you'll be running by next week, you know, you'll be absolutely right as rain, sort of thing. And you'd go in there so full of hope and so believing that this would happen. And that's all I wanted. I kept thinking to myself, you know, why has this happened to me? I want my life back the way it used to be. And I was feeling really quite sorry for myself, to be honest. And I remember waking up from that treatment, and the pain was as, you know, intense, as indescribable as it ever had been. And I mean, to kind of put it into context, the condition is basically rated as being the most painful thing you can experience, more painful than childbirth, and, you know, various other different things. And I remember just holding my dad's hand and crying, and just saying, like, I can't do this anymore. I can't go into each treatment thinking that this will be the one and that I'll be better and things will go back to the way they used to. I just can't do it anymore. And yeah, I was like, no, I'm done. I'd rather accept that this is how my life is now, because, and some people didn't understand that at the time, because they thought that was me giving up. They thought, you've got to keep trying. You've got to, you know, do everything under the sun. And I was like, I've gone through so many years of this now, and nothing ever seems to get any better. And I just thought, you know what, the most positive thing I can do is accept that this is the circumstances that I'm in now, and accept that this is the, you know, the way my body's going to be now. And I started to think, you know, instead of thinking about all the things I've lost and the fact that I haven't got that leg and that I can't do this and I can't do that, what I need to do is focus on what I do still have left. I've still got my other leg, I've still got my arms, I've still got all the rest of my body. And, you know, what can I achieve with that? And it was really at that point that it was a real turnaround for me in terms of starting to kind of get my life back on track and starting to achieve things that I really wanted to achieve again. But the doctor said, you know, you'll never do sport again. You'll never walk again. You'll never do any of these things again. And which I kind of accepted for a while. And I got involved in disability sport. I got very, very involved in coaching and volunteering and things in sport. I was kind of on crutches up and down the hockey pitch, umpiring and things. And it was eventually actually that brought me to disability sport, because I volunteered at the World Wheelchair Basketball Championships. And I was just sat on reception, flicking through the programme just for something to do, because we hadn't had anyone come in for a while. And I saw that this Australian player had complex regional pain syndrome, that she had the same condition as me. And I was like, hold on a second, if she can do disability sport with this condition, surely I can too. And literally it was like that, you know, that dream of going to a games was reignited, you know, albeit now I wanted to go to a Paralympic games. But I straight away got down to my local wheelchair basketball club, you know, took it up, absolutely loved it. I mean, I was just loving doing sport again, because all this time I'd felt like there was almost this massive gaping hole where sport had always been for me. And I'd kind of tried to fill it in with coaching, but it wasn't the same. And in terms of like at school and stuff, I'd lost my identity. I'd been, you know, the sports captain of most of the different clubs, and all of a sudden I was just the girl on crutches. And actually a lot of people at school didn't believe me, because it's not a condition where, you know, you've got a really obvious, it's not a really obvious thing. You can't even see on a scan the way in which the nerves have malfunctioned. So, you know, there were kids that said that I was making it up and things like that, which I really struggled with at the time. But once I got back involved in sport, that really gave me my life back, I think. And then obviously eventually found my way into fencing. So yeah.
Brilliant. It's an amazing story, Gemma. Thanks for telling us that. So I'm aware that we've got some brilliant fencers in the Zoom chat. We've got John and Rafiq. So we'll maybe get back to you if you'd like to ask some questions. But let's do another round of questions from the subs. And Shell, would you like to kick that off?
Yeah, I did have a question in mind, Connor, but looking at the chat, Obu from our audience, if I'm pronouncing your name right, if not, apologies, but they've asked a really good question, which goes on like, how does it feels to be the first British woman to win a World Cup? I don't know if, sorry, I'm not very aware of your achievements, but if that's a fact, Gemma, would you like to share some thoughts and how did it actually feel? I mean, I just before you add to that question, so Zain here, he plays cricket, and whenever he bowls a batsman out, this guy goes on a drive. So I know, his passion is different, but this is World Cup we're talking about. So how does it make you feel?
I'm aware, and that's the point. I'll get there, but Gemma's gonna support me with that. I need Gemma. Bring that every single time. You have to bring that one up.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible. It was quite unexpected, really, because I guess what I missed out when I was just telling you about my disability just then is the fact that actually 3 years ago in 2017, I elected to have my leg amputated. Basically, after suffering with this condition from the age of 15 back in 2008, kind of 9 years later, eventually decided to have it amputated in order to have a better quality of life. And so I had that done in 2017, and then I kind of went back to competing at the end of that year, and I was getting used to actually having to balance a bit differently, because although that leg had been effectively useless, it had still been a counterbalance. So I thought, oh God, it's going to take me ages to almost learn how to fence again with this kind of new balance. And then so to win kind of that World Cup gold, kind of 6 months after getting back into the sport after having my leg amputated, it was just such a shock. And I think it was just really, really special. My dad was there. He travels with me to all my competitions now. But it was the first time he'd ever seen me on the World Cup podium.
So obviously you've been working and training so hard. So what are your plans for Christmas? You're gonna rest? Are you?
Yeah, I'm gonna take. Well, I'll probably take maybe like a day off.
Okay.
3 days off training. Usually, right, I take a bigger break than that. But I think I've been working so hard that I don't want to lose those games over Christmas.
I know what you mean. I respect it.
So yeah, I mean, I'll probably take a couple of days off, maybe like Christmas Eve and Christmas Day or something. I mean, I'm working Boxing Day on the but yeah, so I'm just going to spend it with my family and going to spend like I was saying to some of the guys earlier, because of COVID and everything, because I've had to base myself down here permanently, I haven't seen my husband since like August or something. So I'm going to see him for a couple of days at Christmas and then kind of spend the rest of it with my family down here and see grandparents. We're going to actually have an outdoor Christmas so that we can
Great.
Oh, that's nice.
kind of be with our grandparents, but a bit more kind of, I guess, safely for them.
Yeah.
So we've got a nice big fire pit ready. Dad's trying to get some sofas and stuff made in time, but I'm not going to lie. I think with the amount that he's taking me to training and things, I don't think that's going to get done in time.
Yeah.
It sounds quite fun in your household for Christmas. We should come over.
It's a good laugh. I mean, it'll be top games like all day.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you to the subs. Now I'm aware we've got some excellent fencers in the chat. Rafiq, you've got your hand up. Would you like to ask a question to the brilliant Gemma?
If you don't mind. Yeah. Hello, Gemma.
Hi.
How are you? Thank you very much for coming along. I'd like to ask a question that I think is very important with regards to the current situation we are in. So today we started the vaccinations for the COVID. And I think a lot of sports people, including fencers such as myself, find ourselves in a bit of a difficult position. After spending such a long time in lockdown and observing social distancing, etc., we find ourselves a little bit out of shape. And when this pandemic is over and done with, what is your advice to hit the gym again and get back in shape and then go back to basics to harness and improve our fencing skills, or do the two in conjunction?
I think my main advice would be, if you can, even if it's a little bit a day, try and do some, try and move your body, try and do something like at least a few days a week at the moment, even before we're all vaccinated and we can all hopefully start to go back about our lives a bit more normally. Just because, you lose fitness so much quicker than you gain it. So, even if you can just be keeping a certain base level, it's going to help you so much when you go back. Otherwise, you're really going to feel it. But I think when you go back, it's taking a step back, and it's something that myself and my coach sometimes struggle to do. I had my first épée lesson in a while today because during the national lockdown, I've been able to access sabre coaching, but not épée coaching. And, we found ourselves kind of trying to run before we could walk almost, because my timing's a bit off. And that's something as a fencer that's going to be massive. Like, all you guys are probably going to find that your distance and your timing are a little bit off. The speed might still be there, and the technical skill and the know-how and the thought processes are still there, but you're going to want to do stuff that maybe your body's like, oh, like, I'm not quite sure how to do this anymore. And you've just got to take it slowly and like build up little by little, and just try and get that technique and that timing back so that you can execute what you're actually thinking that you want to execute. And that's something I certainly struggled with today during my lesson. I was like raring to go. I was like, oh, I want to do this, and this. And I was like, no, it's like so rusty. So you just got to be, I think, easy on yourself and be kind to yourself, and think, if you come away from training thinking, oh my God, that was terrible for a few weeks, don't sweat it. It's going to come back. It's just a timing thing, really. So, I mean, do what you can in the meanwhile, but I'd say when you go back as a club, work on your fitness, make sure that you do some good footwork and stuff at the beginning, and then really do some pairs work. Okay, it's not the most fun. It's not going to be as fun as sparring, but if you can do a bit of pairs work before you go launch yourself straight into sparring, because otherwise you'll probably just find that you're just not able to execute what you want to do.
Right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rafiq. John, you're also an avid fencer. Do you have any questions that you'd like to ask?
I do have a question. So you've previously, épée is your primary weapon, the one you got your gold for, and you're doing saber as well. Out of the two, which one's your favorite? And more importantly, why is foil not your favorite?
Okay, foils are we can cross the foil off straight away. Foil is not my favorite because I hate foil. Like, I dreaded foil competition days. I just never got on with the weapon. And I felt like the harder I tried and the better my lessons went, the worse my actual fencing got.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't like foil. Also, I mean, if I'm honest, like, in general, I kind of disagree with priority weapons, because, I mean, if we're fighting each other in the street in, the olden days, if I hit you and I put my sword straight through your heart and you've just grazed me on my arm, I'm not going to be like, well, hold on, like, I win, even though I'm about to die, like, because, you had priority, even though you've just got a flesh wound. Like, it's ridiculous. So in general, I prefer épée for that reason. I think it's just, it's just easier. People understand it better. Spectators understand it better. You get a hit. But I think épée is a difficult one. In a way, épée is my favourite because at the moment it's the one I'm best at. It's the one I've had the most success at. It's the one I obviously won my World Cup gold in, and it's the one that I've competed at the Paralympics in. So it's kind of my comfort zone. But sabre, for me, I only kind of took up 18 months ago, and only really seriously in the last 12 months. And my progress in that is just going up and up and up, like exponentially at the minute. So that's really exciting. And I think in a way at the moment, that's my favourite, because every single lesson I feel like I'm learning something brand new, which is so exciting. Whereas épée is like refining things that I know how to do and just perfecting things. And it's such small margins in fencing. So at the moment, saber's probably a bit more exciting on a day-to-day basis, just because I'm like, oh, new things, like it's like a shiny new toy.
Thank you so much. That's very interesting. I have another question, if you wouldn't mind me asking.
There you go.
Normally for every weapon there's a region that dominates the competitions. You got Italy for foil, you got saber being a very Korean and Chinese oriented weapon. What's the trend in wheelchair fencing? Which nations do you fear the most to face off against?
China, absolutely, in all three weapons, are just insane. I mean, they are so good. And I mean, it's partly because, I mean, the Chinese fencers kind of live together, train together. They're always fencing other fencers that are like the very best fencers in the world. So they just constantly just get better and better. And we don't have the same sparring opportunities. You know, there's not another female in Britain that is of that standard in my category who I can kind of fence and get really good practice against. So a lot of the time I'm fencing able-bodied fencers or men who are really valuable to me in terms of, you know, learning and improving, but it's not quite the same as fencing a female wheelchair fencer in my category. So China are absolutely huge across all three, men's and women's, all categories. And then the other big ones are probably Russia, particularly in épée and foil, and Ukraine in sabre in particular. Ukraine are absolutely exceptional in sabre, as are Hungary. Hungary are very good. So yeah, they're probably like the Hungary, Ukraine, China, Russia are like the power four, I'd say.
Cool. Thank you so much. I have another question, but maybe I'll let someone else take
No, go
over.
ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so another question I have is a more practical one. You've mentioned that, you know, for this in China, they have fencers in China have access to a higher degree of training, higher level of training. Is there something you can recommend from your experience as an athlete and a journalist that the British Fencing Association should be doing better to promote fencing and pull it out of this niche area as a sport to a more mainstream light?
That's a really good question. I think it's a really difficult problem to solve. You know, fencing just isn't a massive sport in this country like it is in some of the ones we compete in. I mean, there's plenty of countries that we compete in. Even wheelchair fencing is broadcast on the national TV whenever we go there. So it's difficult to replicate that because it's such a crowded. I mean, there's so many things already in this country that people are really, really passionate about. So getting them to be interested in something new or something quite niche. It's a bit more difficult, but I think it's all about visibility. And I think hopefully after Tokyo, we'll have greater visibility, particularly in wheelchair fencing. A couple of my my teammates, some of the men, like world number one in their category and have been for the last few years. So, you know, fingers crossed when they bring home loads of gold medals from Tokyo, hopefully that will really help to improve the visibility. And then I think it's just about actually having pathways for people to be successful. At the moment, like I say, you know, because I'm completely self-funded, I can totally see how to, you know, maybe a young girl who has a disability who wants to take up sport, or a young boy that has a disability who wants to take up sport. You might be thinking, you know, there's not really a path for me in this sport. It's hugely expensive anyway. Even when you take out the wheelchairs and the frame and things, you know, fencing is quite an expensive sport. And, you know, they can look to wheelchair basketball or other disability sports and go, yeah, you know, actually I can see that you go from this level and then you move to here and then you move to here and then you move to there. And that's how I eventually chart my pathway, hopefully, to the GB team. Whereas for us, it's like you go from novice and the GB team's here and there's not really anything in between at the moment. And you kind of just have to muddle your way there. And obviously, as a result, a lot of people maybe don't get there. So I think that's something that we have to do. We have to find a way to create a pathway. And I think that goes the same for able-bodied fencing. You know, people need to see that there's a way that they can actually achieve in this sport, regardless of their background. You know, you shouldn't be thinking you can only do it if you go to a really, you know, elite private school. And, you know, I went to a state school, and fencing was certainly never something I would have ever envisaged doing. Certainly nothing that I ever got offered the opportunity to do until I went to uni. So I think we have to really get it into schools, and we have to make sure that kids are picking up, you know, plastic swords at a young age, because especially if you capture them at that young age, I mean, kids love it. They think it's amazing. Like, they get to stab their best friend. They get to wave the thing around, pretend they're Pirates of the Caribbean. Like, we just need to harness that, keep them interested, and then, you know, they'll hopefully take it right through to a good level. But at the moment, I think we're just missing that opportunity a little bit.
Okay, that's a very interesting outlook. Thank you so much for this. And I've got one more question. Probably the last question I have. I know in the high-level fencing, occasionally referees make mistakes, and there's arguments on the piece against the referee, and athletes on YouTube often will argue the point. How is it in your discipline? Have you had the situation yourself when you wanted to strangle the referee for what you thought was a wrong call?
Yeah, I mean, we've all had those situations, right? Like, referees, obviously, they're not, like, nobody's perfect. Nobody can get every decision right. But I think, you know, certainly for me, I always just try and keep a level head and think, well, you know what, actually, I've done that action 4 times now. I probably shouldn't have already done it 4 times. they haven't seen it once. Like, they're not seeing things the way I want them to see it or the way I believe it's happening. And you've just got to change and adapt and think, okay, I'm going to stop doing that action because this particular referee doesn't think I'm beating the blade in the right place or whatever. They're just not seeing it. So that's kind of the attitude I try to take. Obviously, there are times when, you know, it's a lot harder to actually keep that level head, but I try and just adapt to whatever referee that I might have. I think actually probably for me the most difficult is when a referee is, instead of making bad calls in terms of like priority weapons, if a referee is being quite inconsistent in how they're calling for like basically earlies. So I'm not gonna lie, I pick up quite a lot of yellow and red cards for going early because I rely on my speed. So you kind of almost, it comes with the territory, you know that you're gonna pick up a few cards. But sometimes, you know, there's some referees that really kind of like, that will let you go on like of alley, and other ones where you're like, they have to have finished like speaking. And it can be a little bit difficult if they're kind of being quite inconsistent in that manner. That I find difficult because you're just like bleeding red cards and points and you're like, but I didn't go early, that was perfect. But again, it's just about adapting. Then maybe thinking, okay, well, on alley, instead of just going straight direct for an aggressive attack, I'm going to go back, I'm going to set it up, I'm going to make sure that we take that out of the equation. And I think that's really the main piece of advice I give to any fencer is, if the referee is infuriating you and not calling the way you believe it's happening, you've just got to adapt and actually take that judgment call out of the equation for them.
Thank you. That's very insightful. All right, I'll let someone else go ahead now.
Thank you very much, John. Is there anyone else who's in the Zoom chat who'd like to stick your microphone on, stick your camera on, and ask any questions? Here's your time. Okay, that's fine. I've got a question for you, Gemma.
Yeah.
If you weren't a wheelchair fencer, what other activity would you take part in?
If I wasn't a wheelchair fencer, I mean, if we kind of go back in time and change things, I would have hopefully been doing athletics if I didn't have mental disability. Triple jump was really the thing. I was like, oh, that's what I want to do.
That's what
like,
you were doing, yeah.
Jonathan Edwards was my absolute hero. I just thought, like, wow, like the level that he's achieved, like for somebody not to break that world record even now, like insane. But kind of looking at other disability sports, I mean, I'd still like to get involved in athletics. I'd love to be a wheelchair racer. I think that looks like great fun, but I'd only do the short distances. I'm not an endurance athlete at all. So I always think that has looked really fun. And then, I mean, wheelchair basketball is absolutely, I love wheelchair basketball. I don't play it at the minute because, to be honest, it's just too much of an injury risk alongside fencing.
Yeah.
I can't afford to break my fingers. But certainly when I retire from fencing, or if I ever wanted to change, wheelchair basketball would probably be the one I'd go to.
Cool. And what's next for you? You know, where you are right now in your career, what do you see for the future?
Good question. I mean, in the immediate future, hopefully Tokyo, if it goes ahead, COVID permitting, of course. I mean, we've got a couple of qualifiers left for Tokyo. We're supposed to be going to Brazil in February. I'm not sure I can see that happening under the present circumstances, but that's what it says on the schedule. And then Europeans in May. So I guess in the next 12 months, my goals are to kind of absolutely secure qualification for Tokyo. And then, you know, in Tokyo, I would love to come away with a medal. And I know that I'm capable of doing so. You know, I've proved that. When I won World Cup gold in Montreal, I beat the world #1 and the world champion in the final. You know, I'm capable of beating these people. But I'd say at the moment, my consistency is a little bit too up and down, maybe to do it on the Paralympic stage just now. So, you know, I'll go there and I'll be absolutely aiming for a medal and to do my absolute best. But I think for me, the best chance of bringing home a medal is probably either Paris and then LA, and then probably retire after LA. That's a long time away already. But that's the plan. Do 3 more, I think, and then I'll be getting a bit old. But yeah, and then in the next 12 months to get to Tokyo and hopefully better kind of my performance from Rio. You know, I'd like to make the semi-finals at least, and then in May when we have Europeans, I'll be really looking to bring a medal home from that for sure. So yeah.
Excellent, bright futures ahead.
Hope so. Ultimate goal is obviously Paralympic gold and world #1 status. That's the ultimate goal. But
Brilliant. Well, Gemma, it's been a pleasure having you today. Yeah, it's great that you have taken your time up to speak with us. It's been really great hearing your life story, hear everything you've achieved, and what you see, how you see yourself in the future. And to everybody who's tuned in on Zoom, thank you very much. Everyone who's tuned in on YouTube, thank you for tuning in. Next week we will be joined with Tanni Gray-Thompson. Tanni Gray-Thompson competed as a wheelchair racer for over 16 years, and at 5 Paralympic Games, winning 11 gold, 3 silver and a bronze, was one of the most gifted sportswomen of her generation. After retiring from sport, Tanni had a stint as a TV producer and is currently a member of the House of Lords, is a patron of a large number of charities, and is a champion of disability rights. So Tanni will be closing off our Make the Paralympian live streaming event. But Gemma, it's been a pleasure. And yeah,
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Obus, thank you so much, Gemma.
Thank you.
You made history and we're proud of you. So yeah. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you so much for your
you.
time.
Goodbye.
Cheers, thank you, bye.
Bye.